What if the greatest king in history made sure no one would remember him? Imagine a ruler so powerful that his name once echoed across continents, whispered in royal courts, feared on battlefields, carved into mountains of stone. A king whose armies never seemed to lose. A king who didn't just inherit power, he expanded it, shaped it, defined an era around it. His banners darkened horizons. His laws reshaped societies. His voice alone could decide the fate of thousands. Now imagine that same king ordering every trace of his existence to be destroyed. See the flames rising as ancient scrolls curl into ash. Ink dissolves into smoke. Pages that once recorded victories, treaties, and triumphs crumble into nothing. Hear the crash of statues pulled down from towering pedestals. Marble faces shattering against stone floors. The sound echoes through palace halls that once roared with celebration but now stand silent, abandoned, empty. An empty throne sits beneath fading torchlight, not because the king was overthrown, not because he was defeated, but because he chose to vanish. He conquered kingdoms. He rewrote laws. He bent history in his direction. And then he did the unthinkable. He erased himself, not just from monuments, not just from coins, but from memory, from the future, from the story of his own civilization. Why would a ruler at the height of absolute power choose oblivion over immortality? Was it fear? Guilt? A prophecy too terrifying to ignore? Or did he discover something about legacy, something so dangerous that he decided the world would be safer without his name? By the end of this video, you won't just know what he did. You'll understand why a king would destroy his own legacy, and why, despite his efforts, history still remembers the silence he left behind. Long before his name was carved into stone, before armies marched beneath his banner, before entire nations trembled at the sound of his arrival, he was just a second-born son in a quiet corner of a fading kingdom. He was never meant to rule. Born into a royal household overshadowed by war and debt, he grew up watching his father struggle to maintain control over lands that were slowly slipping away. The court was divided. Nobles whispered behind silk curtains. Generals blamed politicians. Politicians blamed fate. And in the middle of it all stood a young prince who learned very early that power was fragile. Unlike his older brother, who was trained for ceremony and diplomacy, he was drawn to strategy. While others attended banquets, he studied maps. While nobles argued about tradition, he studied supply routes and crop cycles. He spent time with soldiers, farmers, and merchants, listening more than speaking. He learned how hunger shaped rebellion, how pride shaped war, how fear shaped loyalty. Then fate intervened. When his brother died unexpectedly during a border conflict, the kingdom was left unstable. The nobles hesitated. The generals doubted. Foreign enemies circled like vultures. And suddenly, the quiet second-born son was thrust onto the throne of a kingdom that many believed would not survive another winter. His enemies expected weakness. What they got was calculation. In his first year as king, he didn't rush into battle. Instead, he reorganized the treasury, restructured military command, and introduced strict but fair taxation reforms that stabilized the economy. He replaced corrupt officials with competent administrators, even if they came from humble backgrounds. That decision alone shocked the aristocracy. Talent, not bloodline, became his standard. Then came his first real test. A neighboring warlord, convinced that the young king would crumble under pressure, invaded from the north. The kingdom braced for disaster. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on, the king cut off their supply lines, redirected river routes, and used terrain to trap them in unfamiliar land. Within weeks, the invading force surrendered, not because they were slaughtered, but because they were outmaneuvered. The victory changed everything. Whispers turned into belief. Soldiers began calling him the Mind of Iron. Merchants praised his stability. Farmers saw harvests protected under his policies. Even rival rulers began studying his methods. He didn't fight wars recklessly, he ended them efficiently. Every campaign expanded the kingdom's borders, but also secured trade routes and strengthened infrastructure. Roads were built, fortresses reinforced, schools established to train scribes and engineers. He wasn't just conquering territory. He was building a system. Under his rule, the kingdom entered what historians would later call its golden expansion. Crime rates dropped. Trade flourished across distant regions. Art and architecture reflected a renewed sense of identity. Massive monuments were erected, not only to honor the gods, but to symbolize unity and order. Yet admiration always walks beside fear, because while the people respected him, they also knew he was capable of ruthless precision. Rebellions were crushed quickly. Traitors were dealt with publicly. He believed stability required strength, and strength required consequence. Those who stood against him rarely got a second chance. Foreign ambassadors described him as calm, almost cold. He spoke little in negotiations, but when he did, his words carried finality. He never appeared impulsive. Every action felt 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. He became more than a king. He became an idea, a symbol of discipline, of strategy, of visionary leadership. Children grew up learning about his victories. Songs were written about his campaigns. His face was stamped onto coins that circulated far beyond his borders. Other rulers sought alliances rather than confrontation. His empire stretched farther than anyone thought possible when he first took the throne. And yet, behind the strength and brilliance, something was shifting. Because as his power grew, so did his awareness of how fragile power truly was. He had mastered war. He had mastered politics. He had mastered prosperity. But his greatest decision was yet to come. Under his rule, the kingdom did not just survive, it transformed. Markets that once struggled with scarcity now overflowed with goods from distant lands. Spices arrived from the south, silks from the east, metals from the mountains beyond the frontier. Trade routes that had once been dangerous were now protected by royal patrols, making commerce faster and safer than ever before. Taxes were structured with precision, light enough to encourage growth, firm enough to sustain the treasury. For the first time in generations, the royal vaults were full not because of plunder, but because of prosperity. Farmers benefited from irrigation systems he personally commissioned. Engineers redirected rivers, built canals, and introduced new farming techniques brought from conquered regions. Harvests doubled. Famine became rare. Grain reserves were carefully monitored and distributed during harsh winters. People no longer feared the changing seasons the way they once had. The cities reflected this transformation. Stone roads replaced mud paths. Public bathhouses and libraries were constructed, not just for nobles but for common citizens. Education expanded. Scholars were invited from foreign lands to debate philosophy, mathematics, astronomy. The kingdom became a center of knowledge, attracting thinkers who once would have ignored it. Art flourished. Murals painted across palace walls depicted not just battles, but unity. Farmers, soldiers, craftsmen all shone as threads in the same fabric. Musicians composed symphonies celebrating peace instead of conquest. Poets described the king as both sword and shield, fierce in war, protective in peace. Then there were the monuments. Colossal statues carved from white marble stood in city squares, capturing his likeness in calm authority. Towers stretched into the sky, their foundations engineered to withstand time itself. Bridges connected regions that had once been isolated by geography. Each structure was designed not only to serve a purpose, but to send a message. This kingdom was permanent. Foreign envoys walked through the capital in awe. They described it as a city that gleamed under sunlight, as if blessed by fortune itself. And people began saying something that spread from marketplaces to royal halls. Everything he touched turned to gold. But perhaps his most impressive achievement was not economic or cultural. It was military dominance without constant war. The army was restructured into disciplined units, trained not just in combat but in logistics and engineering. Fortresses along the borders were reinforced with innovative designs that made invasions nearly impossible. His reputation alone deterred rebellion. Neighboring kingdoms chose treaties over conflict. Pirates vanished from trade routes. Bandits were systematically eliminated. For years, peace reigned, not because the world had grown kinder, but because no one dared to challenge him. And yet, power at that scale changes something inside a man. It began subtly. A decree here, a small change there. He ordered older records to be revised. For accuracy, he claimed. Chroniclers were instructed to emphasize unity over individual generals. Certain events from early campaigns were quietly removed from official archives. No one questioned it at first. Kings adjusted narratives all the time. But then the decrees became stranger. Statues of past rulers were relocated from public squares. Some were replaced entirely. When advisors asked for explanation, they were met with silence or vague responses about long-term stability. Meetings with his council grew shorter. Invitations to strategic discussions became fewer. He began spending long hours alone in the palace's inner chambers, reviewing documents personally instead of delegating. Access to royal archives became restricted. Even trusted advisors found themselves waiting outside doors that were once always open to them. Whispers began. Not rebellion, just confusion. Why was a king at the height of unmatched success tightening control over history itself? Then came the secret meetings. Late at night, small groups were summoned quietly through side entrances of the palace. Not generals, not economic ministers, scholars, record keepers, architects, even sculptors. They would enter carrying scrolls and leave empty-handed. Guards were sworn to silence. Scribes were reassigned without explanation. The palace corridors, once alive with collaboration, grew tense. He still appeared strong in public, still decisive, still calm. But those closest to him noticed a shift, a weight behind his eyes, a mind constantly calculating something no one else could see. Prosperity continued. The empire remained powerful. The people celebrated festivals under lanternlit skies, unaware of the subtle changes unfolding behind stone walls. Everything still looked golden, but gold under enough heat can melt. Tang Dynasty records, 618 to 907 AD, reveal the staggering toll. Roughly 4 in 10 purchased boys didn't survive training to become concubines. Consumed by exhaustion, malnutrition, the crushing weight of identity obliteration before understanding what identity meant. The fallen were buried unmarked. Families never notified. They vanished as if unborn. This wasn't war or plague. It was a business model accepting 40% loss as normal. Trainers, scouts, families knew. The system persisted centuries because the economics favored everyone, except those sold. This was industry. Scouts commissioned, trainers paid, humans priced by youth, beauty, obedience, above life itself. Survivors entered another prison. Quarters better than servants, worse than wives. Silk curtains, jade ornaments, fine furniture. Beautiful, comfortable, locked from outside. Silk walls, iron doors. Life became endless performance. Dawn wake-ups for hours of preparation. Cosmetics, attire, hair flawless, as summons could come anytime. Unprepared meant swift disfavor. Disfavor wasn't reassignment. It was replacement. Discarded with only clothes, no skills, no ties, no family acknowledging you. At 20, usefulness ended. At 25, invisibility. Household competition turned vicious. Masters pitted them against each other, rewarding entertainers, punishing the least pleasing. Trust impossible. Friendship risky. Neighbors betrayed for one more week in favor. Older survivors grew ruthless, learning weakness invited replacement. Food weaponized. Favorites dined on delicacies. The fallen scavenged scraps. Appearance alone shielded from ruin, and masters controlled sustenance maintaining it. Official histories omit this. Many resorted to numbing agents, readily available in wealthy homes. The sole escape from torment. Dependency deepened captivity, as intended. The devastation was profound. Ming accounts, though veiled as accidents to shield reputations, note young men who couldn't endure, final defiance erased.